Hello, welcome. My name is Sergio Baroni, and I'm delighted to be speaking with John Prendergast today. And John, would you be so kind as to introduce yourself to our audience? Tell us a bit about you so people can then inquire more into your work and your writings and so forth.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And first, I want to thank you for inviting me to be part of this interview, and it's
My great pleasure.
Really lovely to be with you. And introductions are always a little dicey because we're kind of telling a story about who we are, and of course it's not true. But that said, I can say a little bit about what I'm up to these days. What am I up to? Well, I'm working on a new book for Sounds True, which is tentatively entitled It Just Feels True, Discovering the Sense of Inner Knowing. And I'm at the beginning process of this project, so the book will be finished in 2014 and published in 2015. So this is my main creative project right now.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
Great to hear that.
And this is my passion. I mean, this is something I really care about, so I'm delighted to have the opportunity to do this. I'm also the senior editor of two books, The Sacred Mirror and Listening from the Heart of Silence. These are books, anthologies that came out a few years ago on the confluence of non-dual wisdom and psychotherapy, and been well received in that particular niche market, and which has led to my creating and founding and being the editor-in-chief of the journal, online journal, Undivided, online journal of non-duality and psychology, which is interactive, multimedia, and free. Your listeners might be interested.
It's a fabulous resource.
So that's at undividedjournal.com, if any of your listeners are interested. And my website is listeningfromsilence.com as well. And for many years, I was an adjunct professor at the California Institute of Integral Studies, and I taught one class a year called The Art of Listening. And I just retired this December as well. And I continue to supervise interns at CIS as well. And then I have a full psychotherapy private practice, and was recently invited to start sharing the Dharma by Dorothy Hunt, who's in the lineage of Adyashanti as well. So this is a new wave of expression as well.
Oh, wonderful. John, I'm delighted to be here talking with you today about embodied awakening, about the sense of what happens to us as we deeply listen to what arises as most true and authentic within us. And as we follow that that intelligence, that sensing, and that felt sense of knowing, what emerges. And I know that you've been a teacher and a practitioner for many years of this kind of inquiry. So I'm delighted to find out more about what currently informs your work as a non-dual psychotherapist. And I hear that you're working on a book.
Yeah, I am. Well, we have a large range here to roam around in. First, I would say I actually don't use the term non-dual psychotherapist. And I put a little distance between non-dual wisdom and psychology or psychotherapy, just because it's so easy to get stuck in a frame and to assume an identity, and then it becomes a mental image that one identifies with, and that actually creates a sense of subtle separation in relationship, and particularly in a therapeutic relationship. So I don't actually think of myself as a non-dual psychotherapist. And I think it's good not to think of oneself as
At all.
anything. It always works better that way. So just a footnote on that point. But it's fine to talk about non-dual psychotherapy. And
how would you describe your work at this point? Or what do you name it? Do you just not...
I actually don't name it. It's interesting. I may describe it a little bit as an experiential and present-centered approach, an approach that is grounded in the body, and that emphasizes being deeply in touch with oneself, and if there's interest in one's true nature as well. So it's interesting. It really depends on the interest and capacity of the person that I'm working with as a psychotherapist. Some people are interested in working more on just a psychological level, and I think that's very valuable and honorable work to do in terms of dealing with conditioning. And then increasingly I have clients who are interested in discovering their true nature and living in accord with it, embodying this understanding as well. And I love working with people who bring in that interest as well. So it depends. I work in a multidimensional way, I would say, and it's very much in the moment in terms of kind of sensing what's available and how energy is moving, and what's wanting attention as well. So I work a lot with the subtle sensing too, and with resonance and attunement and dissonance, and so it's very relational as well. It includes the field that we're in, and what's moving and what's stuck and what's alive, and so I talk about it in a very simple way, but mainly it's an invitation, I would say, to really be deeply present and to explore what gets in the way, apparently, of that, and how we can deepen into that awareness as well. I have a kind of rough, overarching model of thinking about how awareness moves, I would say, in terms of an embodied way. And I don't think this is true for everyone, but I see it's been true for myself and for many people that I know, which is, for whatever reason, at a certain point, there is a seeing through of who we take ourselves to be. Generally, first with a mental identification with an idea or some core story of ourselves, and there's a release then from that, and a sense of great space, like infinite space, sometimes spoken of as vastness, or openness, and a sense of great freedom as well. This is like an initial either glimpse or awakening. If there's like sufficient clarity, there's actually a gravitational shift of awareness from the identified mental self to openness, I would say. So a sense of great freedom and release. This is just actually the beginning of the process, though. And we've talked about this a little bit before. But some people get very attached to this open emptiness and this freedom from form. It's actually a kind of waking up out of form and identification with being just this body, mind, and just this story. So it's a very important turning point in terms of this gravitational shift of identity and attention. But very often people, after having a significant opening, find themselves re-immersed in their conditioned.
There I am again.
Here I am again. Darn it, why? Why did that happen? There's a recrystallization.
I must be doing something wrong.
I must be doing something wrong, yeah. And yet it's the most normal and natural processes for this to happen. And it initiates a whole nother phase, I would say, of waking down, which is the transposition of this awareness downward through the body, penetrating the conditioning that makes up the bulk, I would say, of the separate sense of self, and which is much more than just cognitive. which is emotional and instinctual. And this is a much, whereas the initial awakening or glimpse of awakening is can be very sudden and can happen at any time, regardless of the conditioning that a person has. This next movement of waking down feels like it's much more gradual generally and thorough, and sometimes quite difficult as people begin to be more emotionally vulnerable and discover all the obstructions to their own experience and that with others.
Right, and in my experience, it takes quite a bit of stamina. I mean, the commitment to, say, become willing to tolerate quite a bit of shame along the way. The triggering of shame, the triggering of, oh my God, there is this in me too.
Right. Yeah. I would agree. It takes a lot of honesty and vulnerability with ourselves and others to face this conditioning. And it seems like, you're mentioning shame, highlighting it, and I know this is kind of a special kind of interest and focus, and I really agree with what you're saying. When our experience is not congruent with our ideal, right, of how things should be, there's that dissonance and incongruence, and it's a lot to face. Right. And there are many layers to it as well, to shame. I find shame and terror, or shame and fear, are quite a active twinship of feelings. There's shame of being afraid. There's fear of being ashamed. Right. We find interlocking layers of those two feelings, and the scripts that go with them as well.
And then there's the whole subject of how invariably we've all been traumatized to varying degrees. Just coming into this world, taking a human body and living in human families and going and being subject to the kind of experiences that in varying degrees create pain, a sense of, I don't want to be here right now, a sense of wanting to avoid life, hide, run away, disconnect. And that even as we move from childhood into the adult phase of life, those scripts, there tends to be still that compulsion toward, if it doesn't feel good, I'm out of here.
That's right.
Just don't want to have to.
Don't want to be here.
Yeah.
Right. On whatever level we're speaking, whether it's to be really feel our feelings, to sense our bodies, but also to incarnate, interestingly, right? Just to be here as a human being in this often dense and very difficult realm as well. And I've seen that a lot with people who are oriented spiritually, the desire to transcend and avoid. And it's interesting, there's an ambivalence. There's something very pure in that movement to transcend, to know true nature, and then there's something averse and avoidant as well. And I find working with people, and I was probably one of these people not so long ago, right? It was like drawn to spirituality for mixed reasons. Right. Something very clear.
I can cop to that.
Yeah. And yet something like, this is very uncomfortable and I'd like to be out of here.
Yes.
I'd like to be away from my pain. But what we discover actually is these places that are painful and difficult are actually the way in. They're portals into essential qualities and into an embodied way of being. And so I know my whole understanding has shifted, and these shadowed and difficult areas to me look like gold mines. Right. And those places that seem so empty of any quality, actually the polarity exists. So if we're exploring terror, for instance, if you go deeply, if you really deeply explore and are intimate with it, it opens into a place of fearlessness. And likewise with shame. If there's a willingness to deeply explore that shame, it opens up into, something beyond being, feeling good or bad about oneself.